Hello, my name is Thomas Steinmauer. I'm the product manager of the Log Manager series and FB TraceManager at Upscene Productions. This screencast is about discussing how you can use the Firebird Trace API in combination with our FB TraceManager product to audit LogOn and LogOff events to your databases. First of all, when talking about the Trace API, you can use the Trace API in two different ways, either with a so-called system audit or with a user trace. A system audit basically starts a trace session upon the Firebird server starts. So whenever you start the Firebird server and trace session is automatically started. In comparison with a so-called user trace, the user trace needs to be started manually by a user. So that's the main difference. First of all, let's have a look by using a system audit to trace LogOn, LogOff events to your databases. There is, if you open the firebird.conf configuration file, you will see a configuration parameter called Audit trace config file. If we remove the command here and provide a path to a trace configuration file, this basically means that whenever your Firebird server starts, a system audit trace is started based on this configuration file. If we have a look on the configuration file, it's a very basic example here, especially tailored for tracing the LogOn and LogOff trace events. First of all, we have a database filter here. It's a regular expression. So whenever the tourism part, the text is part of the database connection string, we want to trace something. So the trace needs to be enabled. We are particularly interested only in the attached database and detached database trace events. So that can be done by using the log connections configuration parameter set to true. And we are also interested in any errors we see. For example, if we are trying to connect with an invalid user password combination, we want to see the full error message in the trace output. And we also have to provide, when talking about a system audit here, we have to provide a log file name parameter, which basically points to a file in the server file system, which stores the trace output, the raw trace output. So let's give it a try. If we have changed the firebird.conf file, and we're gonna restart the Firebird server here. Alright, so if we are going back here and we are connecting to our tourism database here, we will see that a new file is created here, which we have defined with the log file configuration parameter. So if we open that with text editor, we will see then the regular trace output you are probably already familiar with. For instance, we have used the FSQL utility here to connect to the tourism database. What we see here is it's an attached database trace event with some useful information. It's the particular database, the attachment ID, the user used while connecting, the role, haven't used the role, the character set, some client information. So it's the local connection, and basically the remote process name. So quite some useful information. And if we will see, if we issue a disconnect here and we are going back we will see that another trace event called detached database is added here, and the trace session is finished. So basically what we see here with this configuration here, only the log connections set to true, we will see the attached database trace event and the detached database trace events here. So that's pretty much everything we need if we want to audit LogOn, LogOff trace events to a database. Well, that's only the first part, getting the trace output. The second part is you probably are interested to analyze the trace here somehow. So with the default trace row output, it's gonna be a bit difficult. It can be a bit difficult. So what we can do with our FB TraceManager product here is to use the trace API and the trace output in a more friendly way. For instance, let's connect to our server. We already see one trace session running here of type audit, so that's a system audit. That's our system audit trace session, started automatically if you're using the system audit mode by providing a proper trace configuration file in the firebird.conf file. What we also can do is running a user trace session. A user trace session here in the FB TraceManager. You first have to create the project. So I'm gonna give it a name: Audit LogOn LogOff. Again, we are using the same settings here as in the trace configuration file for system audit. So we are interested here as well in the tourism being part of the database connection string, and we are interested in the connections, and we also want to get the log errors here in case some errors are happening. So that's pretty much everything we need. We don't need a log file name parameter here. That's only particular for system audits. So for a user trace session, we get the near real-time output here. So we can do one thing here as well to get more immediate feedback. The parsed trace data can be stored in the FB TraceManager database, and with a commit interval of 1, we see immediate output here in the database. So back to our example here. If we connect again to our database, I'll see that there is some we also get the attached database information here now. That's the parsed way. So with the parser, that's the row output, which is equal to the output in the log in the system out log file. So again, if we disconnect, we get the same information here in a user trace session. Alright, we also see the usual things like the remote process name and all information available. What you see in the row output is parsed and presented in the grid here. So to make things a bit more appealing, we can use the event processing module here. For instance, we want to have the event state a bit more colorized here. So what we can do here is there are some code fragments here. So you basically write an event rule with the event processing module. So you point to the project, say new rule. We want to color our cell. So we're gonna call that cell coloring event state. And again, at rule position 0, and we're gonna add the code here. We compile, we go back, reload the event processing rule, and issue another connect here. And we will see that a successful operation gets colored with green. So let's give it another try. Disconnect again and connect with an connection string pointing to a database which doesn't exist. So if we're gonna try that one here, we get an exception in the client application, and if it in respect to the trace API and the output, it's a failed attached database here, and it's mapped to an event state of 1 here on FB TraceManager, and according to our event rule, it's colored with a different color here. And new in the trace API in Firebird 2.5.2 is the possibility to also trace the client error message. And if you're using the log errors configuration parameter, what we have done when creating the trace project, you get very useful information here what basically happened here. So error while trying to open the file because the database simply doesn't exist. Now let's try connecting to an existing database, and with an invalid user password combination. The thing is different here now. It isn't failed, but it gets a different state here now called unauthorized, and according to our event rule, it's colored with red. And again, it's an error, and if we go to the error at trace event, we will see that your username and password are not defined. So that's a mechanism, and that's a way to distinguish between a successful connection, a failed connection, and an unauthorized connection, which is very interesting, very important if we want to analyze the trace data from different perspectives. All right, let's make a second example with the event processing thing. For instance, we want to give the event name entry here whenever it is an attached database or a detached database event, a different font style. So we create another rule. It's of type self formatting, and give it a name, LogOn, LogOff. We want to execute it after the cell coloring event rule, so we give it a higher rule position. We copy paste the code here, which basically is whenever the event name is attached database or detached database, we want to have the grid font of style bold. So we compile this one here, we reload the event processing rules, and if we go back and we connect to the database and disconnect again, we will see that we beside the event state column, we also get now a different appearance of the event name. So that's a very convenient way to get notified more visually here. So that's very useful. All right. The thing here is that parsed trace data gets persisted into the included FB TraceManager database. So what we can do here is when browsing here now the result set here, we will see that the information is now available in the database, in the FB TraceManager database, and can be queried like any other table. So if we go into a client tool here, we probably want to spot, if we're talking about auditing LogOn and LogOff scenarios, we are only interested in querying those information to probably see some other things here. FB TraceManager provides some views here, some predefined views. If we have a look, it's basically querying from another view with a left of type attached database and a left join to the events of detached database. So if we query this view here, you get the entire information you see here. For instance, the LogOn timestamp. So if we order by one descending, we will see the last one here. LogOn timestamp, LogOff timestamp, the LogOn duration in second, the client IP address, it was a local connection, the client process name, client process ID, the username, the role name, and so on. So a lot of useful information here. A lot of useful information if you want to analyze your LogOn, LogOff scenarios or the database usage here. Well, there's, as I already have mentioned, the event state defines if it was successful, if it was failed or unauthorized. So probably you aren't interested in successful connections. Probably you are, or probably you aren't. Perhaps the most interesting things here is, for instance, if you're interested in connecting or unauthorized access. So there is another view here you can use, and you will see that we basically get some information here as we have simulated unauthorized access by providing an invalid user password combination. And you will see that, for instance, the client process FSQL from the client IP address has used the user tourism to connect to our tourism database, and it was unauthorized, so he basically has used an invalid user password combination, which could mean, well, he simply wrote the password wrong, for instance, or it was some kind of attack or something like that, an internal attack, or someone has tried some user password combination of other employees and so on. So that's very useful. Another thing, of course, is if you want to query the failed events, for instance, if provided a database here which doesn't exist, could also be a potential security risk if someone tries to connect to a database he doesn't know. So this is something you can do with the Trace API and the data and the output the Trace delivers what you can query. So that's very useful. Let's open. I've prepared another query here. For instance, this one here is interesting as well. If you want to have some kind of statistic about the usage pattern of your client applications connecting to your databases, perhaps you're hosting several databases and you want to get some impression about the number of sessions established to one or another database, you can easily query that by using the predefined view here with group by. So for instance, if you execute the statement here, what you see here is that it's a demonstration database, so we have only a very low number of successful connections here. But for instance, we will see that the FSQL utility has connected to the tourism database 6 times. So that could be an interesting information, for instance, for resource planning. So if you have a database which is highly used, you could improve, for instance, the server hardware or something like that. But you also could have a look on, for instance, if GBack, the backup utility, is doing its job and running for instance every night or something like that. What you also can do is for instance, well, of course the example can be done with the unauthorized part or with the failed part. So whatever you're interested in, possibly you're also interested in how many unauthorized session tries have been available for a particular database, for a particular client process, for further inspection if there's something wrong for example, from a security point of view. Another thing what you can do here is basically the database usage outside of a regular business day. For instance, I'm not sure if I get a result set back here now because of the demo database. Well, yes. For instance, if I want to query those entries, those trace events where the logon timestamp has been before 8 o'clock or after 5 p.m. Or the same for the LogOff, you can query that easily. And for instance, we will see that well, there has been a client process called database workbench at a particular date, which was connecting to a particular database. So this can be useful information again for analyzing some security risks or some misuse of databases, or for instance to spot things like that GBack is running in the night twice on a database or something like that. So there's a lot of things you can do with the persisted trace data here from an analysis point of view. All right, that was the example here with a user trace and event processing. What FB TraceManager supports here as well is running a trace project as a Windows service, so that you don't have to start FB TraceManager every time and so on. So what you can do here now is you open the project and go into the Logger service part here. The service application, the FB TraceManager Logger service application is part of the registered download and needs to be licensed separately from the FB TraceManager product. But what you can do here is we can automatically fill some information about the session name, the Windows service name, display name, and what FB TraceManager configuration file it should use. So we're gonna save that. We then can install the service. If we go into the Windows Services panel here, we now see a new Windows service called Audit, LogOn, LogOff. And what we then can do is we can start. We can start the trace. we will see here again and refresh that the service is started. And if we go back here, we also now see a new trace session running here, a user trace, which with a session name like that. So it's pretty much the Windows servers. So if we now go back to the browse module here and refresh, we will see that another session, trace session, has been started from the Windows servers without any records so far. So what we are doing now here is we are trying again to connect, to disconnect, and so on. So if we go back and refresh, we get the information here persisted into the FB TraceManager database as well, without running FB TraceManager, of course. So for instance, if we are closing FB TraceManager and doing that again and disconnect, that's pretty much everything. Then the Windows service trace now captures everything. So if we go back here again with FB TraceManager and having a look on the persisted trace data, here we again see that this Windows service based trace session here is still running. And if we go to the browse module here, we will see additional entries here. So that's a very convenient way to run a user trace session by a Windows service application, backed and supported by the FB TraceManager product. Well, that's pretty much everything I want to cover. We have already seen that the Firebird Trace API is a very, very major tool, a very major feature, and beside other use cases listed here, and we provide screencast for that, auditing LogOn, LogOff events to your databases can be covered with the Trace API very, very easily. And what FB TraceManager helps you here in getting up and running with the Trace API, with the parsing, with the persisting of the trace data, to enable trace data analysis and trace data inspection at a later time, and query some things out of the trace data, what we have seen here. So that's everything I want to cover in this screencast. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.